thanks everybody for coming. You know, as JC mentioned, this really is just about helping continue to support Atlanta being the premier place to start and grow a health IT business. There's so many great resources, so many great people, and we really want to continue to pull those together. So today we got 3 great entrepreneurs here in the Atlanta area. And what we'll do is just, a little bit of their background, what they're working on, and then just some general challenges and opportunities for healthcare entrepreneurs in Atlanta. So first, just before we get going, and we'll go into more detail, but what's the 30-second pitch of what your company does and who you are?
So, hey, I'm, hello? Is it on? It's technology.
There we go. The on button works miracles.
That works a lot better. So I am Faircloth, and I'm with CCI, Coordinated Care, Inc., and we're focused on practical solutions to the rural health space. And we help get patients from rural areas who go into tertiary hospitals back home to their local hospital for their subacute care.
Hi, I'm Rachel McCrickard. I'm the CEO and founder of Motivo. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So Motivo helps new therapists get their credentials after grad school. Therapists go through a very similar process that doctors do, like residency. It's called clinical supervision, and therapists have to meet with another person called a clinical supervisor to get their hours. New legislation now allows that to be done online through secure video conference. So we have a platform that matches a new therapist with a clinical supervisor for online supervision.
Hey guys, good morning. Hey, good morning guys. I'm Ashish Advani, and I'm a founder of InpharmD. Traditionally, medical decisions are based on subjective determinants like habit or gut or ritual or instinct or anecdotal evidence, and we want those decisions to be made based on data. And so what we do is we take questions from your healthcare providers, doctors, PAs, nurse practitioners, pharmacists. They put in a question into our platform, and we use humans plus AI to be able to give them customized data back in return.
Great. Well, thanks for the quick intro. And let's maybe just start with, how did you get into healthcare, or why did you get into healthcare? I know each of you have a little bit different story, but T, baby, you want to start with how and why you got into healthcare?
Oh boy, mine's kind of strange. I'm originally from Georgia, but after college moved to New York and got into finance and ended up running the distressed and bankruptcy desk at an investment bank called Solomon Brothers. And buddy of mine who went to medical school, he used to come visit me, and at the time I was running London and New York, so I had a trading operation at home, and he'd seen me dealing with screwed up industries, and he was based in Augusta, but he was having to practice in rural Georgia, and one day he got fed up and called me and said, "You like really screwed up industries. You've never seen anything as screwed up as the rural health system." And he didn't know that I was going to come live on his floor in an air mattress for about a year. And I moved to Augusta and started working with the Medical College of Georgia and just did a deep dive into healthcare. So that was my journey there.
So for me, the problem that we're solving is a problem I experienced myself on my own road to licensure. I'm from a rural area of Georgia. I was driving 2 hours to get to the closest clinical supervisor and paid $8,000 to get the hours that I needed to become a licensed therapist. So a lot of people talk about the shortage of mental health providers. SAMHSA says 55% of U.S. counties, all of them rural, have no practicing therapists, social worker, or psychologist, and it's really because of this issue that clinical supervisors are hyper-located in urban areas, and much of the country that needs mental health professionals the most don't have them because they don't have this pathway to licensure after they graduate.
So I'm a pharmacist, and I was doing this exact thing that our business does, but in a non-tech way for Mercer University for 10 years. I was leading a team of people that would provide custom data for doctors, but we used no technology. And I thought it was the weirdest thing, that something so critical, these decisions that are being made have such adverse consequences and are so costly, and yet we have such a valuable infrastructure that just wasn't being used that much because it was so hard to connect with us at Mercer. And there was about 100 of us throughout the nation, all leading teams in individual silos. And so this idea wasn't an invention, really. It was really just sort of, hey, why don't we create a network of all of us and then give us access to that network with the touch of a button, much like Uber did or Domino's does. And so it was just sort of I was working in the industry and saw all of these tech changes of how they're changing other industries and thought, why is it that we're so far behind? And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so that's just kind of how I got into it. It wasn't that I had dreamt of being an entrepreneur. I just couldn't stop thinking about this problem.
Well, I love some of those stories. So let's go a little deeper into those. And I think, Ashish, Rachel, your story's a little similar in different spaces. And T, we'll come to your story in just a minute here. But let me start maybe with Ashish there. So how did you go from, I see this problem, to I want to go after and dedicate myself to really solving this problem? How did it move from an idea to I'm going after this as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so if anyone else is in the same boat, one book I read too late, it was called Idea to iPhone, and I read it after we had gotten started, but many of the things that we first did were luckily enough like some of the things that we started to do. But I think going back over again, if I could start it all over, I would have done a whole lot more with customer discovery right from the beginning. Before we even built anything, I would have gone and interviewed 10x more folks than I think that we ended up doing. But that's how we got started, was just talking to people, as many as I could, before we got done, or before we even wrote a single line of code. The hard part, though, in healthcare, and this is unlike any other industry, is if you have a talented team in any other industry or a really good idea in any other industry, you could get funded pretty easily compared to healthcare. In healthcare, you really have to have a product, you have to have traction, you have to be much further along than any other industry. And so that part was tough for us to be able to show something before we could actually get investment. And it took a good 5 or 6 years. There's not a really good story or solution here. It was just a slow build until we had enough to get someone to believe in us. And that someone was our university. Mercer University invested first. They wrote our first check. And that's when we really started to get going. But it was a 6-year overnight success, if that makes sense, just to get to that first check.
Good stuff, Ashish. Let's come back to the funding stuff in a little bit. But Rachel, maybe from your side, what made you make the jump from I see this problem to I'm going to solve this problem?
I had a great job and worked at a mental health agency, but I saw in 2016 when Georgia passed the law to allow telesupervision, I started looking into other states and realized that 45 states had also begun to allow it, but there was no solution yet for online supervision. I thought someone should really do something about that. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll do something about it. So I don't have a technical background, but I just used Shopify and uploaded a bunch of supervisor profiles. Zoom has a HIPAA compliant version, so I used that in the back end and just put it out in the market to see if anybody would buy it. We started getting our first customers that way and used that to get into Techstars Atlanta, which is when I hired my lead developer to begin building Motivo, which launched in March of this year. So it was really just this, I can remember vividly driving down the road once and I thought, if I don't do this, I'm gonna always wonder if I could have done it. So that was the deciding piece for me to say, like, I'm gonna quit my job and just focus on this full time and see where it goes. So.
Great story there. So T, yours is getting a little bit different, but as you went and got called into, hey, this is a messed up industry, hey, let me go do some research in this rural health space, what was sort of the triggers for you that said, yeah, there's something here, I want to go after this?
Well, I mean, I think just with the attendees here, it's, healthcare is a chance to make a real impact. Ben Dyer talks about, don't create another free beer app, and in healthcare, you can actually really affect people's lives. And that's kind of deep and a whole lot different than, restructuring the movie industry. That's fun, but it's not like really means a lot. And here, everybody in here has the chance to affect a lot of other lives, hopefully positively. But so we just got in and did a deep dive into sort of first principles, worked things out, and came up with a couple of logical solutions, and we were fortunate enough to have some of the instructors at the Medical College of Georgia vet our ideas, because I had a couple of dumb ones. And then we came across one that nobody could tell us why we couldn't do it. And once we did that, we just did a ton of customer discovery. And you know, I kind of knew we were on something when I was in the basement of a rural hospital in South Georgia. And the senior woman there turned to me when I was leaving and said, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "You're coming back tomorrow, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "It's been 20 years I've been here. You're the first person to come down and care about what I'm doing." And that was kind of cool. So
there we go, yeah. Good stuff, good stuff. So I heard a couple different mentions of sort of customer discovery there. So maybe we want to go into that a little bit. Maybe talk about how you thought about customer discovery when you were doing it at sort of at the beginning and what you learned. And then, you know, looking back now, Ashish, you include a little bit what you would have done differently to sort of refine your hypothesis or the problem or the idea.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up where I left off. We have two types of customers in one sense. We have the on-the-ground users, and we had been doing that for, you know, I mentioned 6 years before we even really got started with our software solution. And so I knew those customers pretty well. And this might be the case with you guys or really anyone else that does B2B, is there's another customer that we really need to get to interview, and that's that decision maker at that healthcare system. And I only talked to one of those. And so that is a different product market fit. The initial product market fit with doctors, we had it wasn't hard, but it wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard, in that I had lived my whole life or my whole career kind of talking with those. The harder part, and the thing I wish I did sooner, was taking a lot of those decision makers out to breakfast or lunch and asking them, what do you care about when you're thinking about this decision? Because those, you know, when I'm talking to doctors, I talk to them about time saved, or how it's not frustrating anymore to do a literature search. But when I'm talking to those administrators, all they really care about is ROI. And so I really need to be able to show that. And I think if I would have done that earlier on, I would have been in a much better position now. Thankfully, they're all saying yes at this point, but there's a chance that we could have built something for just one health system, and then I would not be sitting here smiling right now. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I just spent 6 years building something that just one health system wants. And so I would have done a little bit more of that early on, is interviewing not just the people that are using the app, but also the decision makers that are ultimately making those decisions for the people that are using that app.
Yeah, for me, I would say, you know, we started out with a lot more of a B2C focus. So the people who live in rural areas, who didn't have a supervisor, who came to us struggling and needing someone, but the growth on that side was just so slow. And, you know, we fought for every single customer, trying to inform them about it and give them a good onboarding experience. And what we discovered was that there was a larger market opportunity in the B2B side. So there's community mental health agencies that employ large numbers of pre-licensed therapists, because you can bill Medicaid without a license as long as you're under supervision. You can't bill private insurance without a license, but you can bill Medicaid. So there's these large Medicaid agency who employ large numbers of therapists and provide them with clinical supervision. So we began signing a few of those, and that's what's really picking up now, and what has resulted in you know, much higher revenue jumps over the last 3 to 6 months, which is really just critical when you're fundraising and you're at this like early stage. Like, I think that, you know, what I would have done differently is not focus so much on B2C. And I realized I did that because I saw myself in those people, because that was my story and what I struggled with, and I was kind of replicating that. But at this stage of the company, when we're so early, it's so much more important to prove out the model on a larger scale and show how you can get there faster. And then the B2C is just coming naturally and organically as people find us, but it's not our full focus.
Yeah. So couple things that did you say something, T? Okay. So a couple things in there I think are interesting, that in healthcare too, your comment first, Ashish, around the user versus the decision maker. And I think I see that commonly in other industries too, but healthcare also has the complexity of the medical side versus the business side, or if you've got, depending on who you're selling to, you've got the payer, the provider, the life science. There are many other players involved. So any advice to folks here as they're thinking about starting business or ideas of how to navigate that, or lessons learned of the order to do it, whether one before the other or together, or any thoughts on that?
Are you asking specifically in terms of which industry you're targeting? Or which industry within healthcare you're targeting? Pharma versus payer versus
Yeah, so just
consumer?
think of a general different decision maker. So as you're going, like, hey, how much time do I spend with the user versus the decision maker? How much time do I spend with the medical side versus the business side? Because to your point, each one has a different lens they're looking at it through.
Yeah. So I think this is a really important part of customer discovery too. I think in healthcare, correct me if I'm wrong, but I look at it as a few different types of audiences we could go after. We could go direct to consumer. We could go towards the big payers, the insurance companies, the PBMs, the largest one being the government. We could go to pharma, or we could go to health system. And so first we have to decide which of those we even want to play with. This one found us, health system found us. We realized that most of the big decisions were coming from there, and so we ended up at health system. If I could pick, I would pick pharma. If I were designing a product all from scratch and I was picking one of those four, I would want to sell to pharma. And we even tried, AT knows this, we even tried to say, oh, could we even pivot and just focus on pharma because they're just such an ideal customer? And you know, we went that route and we tried to go to those decision makers, and we may still, but we ended up kind of focusing solely on health system for right now. And I think, to get back to your question, the reason why we figured that out was solely customer discovery. We went to each of those four buckets and just went and interviewed as many folks as we could to try to collect as much data as we could. And then we kind of decide, okay, this is the route that we're going to pursue. But I think for anyone with an idea, those are all four viable targets. And eventually, maybe you can find some way to get 2 or 3 or 3 or 4, something like that.
T or Rachel, any thoughts on different decision makers and how you navigate those along the way?
Well, we're focused, we're a two-sided marketplace, so we're focused on large health systems and rural hospitals. And, when you look at the hospital system, it's, in college I studied chaos theory, and closely related to that is complexity theory. And, but a hospital, the whole healthcare system is a complex system. It's a nonlinear, multivariable system with 5 key components. And I got the 5 key components from Marcus Osborne when he was giving a diatribe, who's the head of healthcare for Walmart, but he was giving his diatribe on why, the health system is broken. And my argument is the health system's not broken. It just has 5 key components, and it's a complex system. So I think if you're trying to affect change, you have to understand the 5 key components and how the different variables move within the situation, and which one, if you're affecting one, those other 4 are likely going to be affected. And the 5 key components, at least according to me, I'm not sure that means anything, but the 5 key components are the patient, the provider, the payer, and then your facilities, be it a hospital or a surge center or whatever, and then the pharma, what's your disposables, which is pharma and medical devices. And so for each component, if you're affecting one, the other 4 are likely going to be affected. So you'd better understand how your solution, which could be just focused on pharma, how does it affect the payers? How does it affect the patient? How does it affect the provider? How does it affect the hospitals? And if you just focus on one and try to give a simplistic solution to a complex problem, I don't think you have a chance. So you've got to understand systemically how the whole system works. And it's hard, and it's complex, and it's tough. And when you're selling into a hospital, you've got 6 people who can say no and 0 who can say yes. They all have to say yes. So that's a tough sale. And so it's hard. And, the rock's going to come down the hill every day on you. And you just have to get up every day and keep doing it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so let me follow that a little bit with something, Rachel, you said as well, of, hey, it started B2C with the original idea, then now pulled in more of a B2B, and Ashish, your comment of, hey, I tried to go after pharma a little bit, but pivots are common in businesses, but also in healthcare, they're more challenging for some of the reasons you mentioned, T. How did you think about pivots to where you've gotten today, and as future pivots could potentially come, how do you evaluate those? How do you look at those and say, in your case, Rachel, yeah, there may be something, let's switch more to a B2B, or Ashish, in your case, no, let's not go this route? How do you evaluate potential pivots?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the benefits of what we uncovered under B2B is that we're not selling into hospital systems, and for all the reasons that T mentioned, that's so complicated. I mean, for these agencies, they're not used to being sold to. The sales cycle is 4 weeks to 12 weeks. We're bringing an innovative solution to them that solves a pain point for them. So, I think that we have just learned how to have the conversation with both the clinical director, who's more interested in good clinical development. So they resonate with our message that we're going to be able to match them with supervisors that are uniquely qualified for their agency. So say that they deal with a lot of childhood trauma, we can find supervisors that specialize in that might not live in their local area. So that resonates with clinical directors. But from the bottom line perspective, that's what the CEO or the executive director is thinking about. And there's been a play for us there too, because I really feel like that one of the reasons Motivo is having some success is because timing is just so good for us with the legislative decisions, but also from a perspective of the auditors. So what we've learned is that these entities like Beacon Health Systems that audit these community mental health agencies have changed their regulation around the kind of documentation they want about clinical supervision. So we're just right there at the epicenter of we're making this process easier and more well documented for the agency, which saves them money in terms of like recoupment of Medicaid dollars if they don't have accurate supervision. So there's just a sell on both sides, and we kind of have to like determine which one we're going to go with depending on the person that we're talking to.
So to give an illustration of why Rachel is so much smarter than we are, she talked about a 4-week sales cycle. Last night at 10 o'clock, I heard back from the person in charge at a very large mountain western health system who I met on May 11th. And her job is specifically get patients from rural areas back home. Couldn't be a better client. I heard back from her that we have a call with them next week, finally with the VP. So that's November, so 6 months. And she's got a 4-week sales cycle, and we're getting our first call to an ideal client 6 months later. So that's why you're so much smarter.
I just wanted to say I really am so much smarter.
Yeah. Oh, and there you have it right there. So let me ask, switching gears a little bit here then on Ashish, your comment earlier on funding, because one of the questions we often hear from entrepreneurs is, do I try and bootstrap this myself? Do I try and go raise a little bit of money? Do I try and go raise a lot of money and go fast? As you started to go through the process of, I've got an idea, I've done some discovery, I think there's something there, I'm going after this, how did you navigate that decision-making process of all bootstrap to get going, or raise a little bit, or raise a lot, or evaluate it later? How did you each think about that dynamic?
Yeah, so let me be clear. We took not traditional funding. It's not dilutive. It's more like a grant in that way. And I think that's probably more typical for healthcare than any other industry. I think I mentioned before, if you had a product, even pre-product, but a great team or a successful founder that's done it before, you wouldn't have that much trouble raising in Atlanta or San Francisco or anywhere else. But healthcare is different. And so I think we had to really show a whole lot more before even Mercer would write that initial check. And then ever since then, we haven't taken any money, like traditional capital, I would say. But I think that's a good thing. I think we live in an era of WeWork, which all of us have seen. And I think healthcare businesses are different because we can't rely on that funding to get off the ground. And so we have to build businesses that are lean and mean and microeconomically sound. And so then when we can get to that Series A or later, we have really good businesses. I look at this as like how I look at my kid going to public versus private school. I don't want my kid to go to private school. I want him to go to like a really tough public school. And then when he makes it out of there, he's going to be incredible, right? And I think of our business the same way. Is like I really am glad in some sense that healthcare is this way that makes it really, really tough for us to get up and off. But then once we do, we've got really great businesses to be able to take investment money from. That's all we're trying to get to, is that next step.
So we have raised capital. I started the company. I just took out a home equity line of credit, and that's how I started the company. And then we started to get some angel money. Techstars came with an investment, and then we're about to close next week. We have an oversubscribed $1.5 million round that we pushed to $2.5 million because we had some late interest. So that closes next Wednesday, and then I'm going to take a nap, and it's going to be great. But it has not been an easy road, and I mean, two reasons, well, a lot of reasons it hasn't been an easy road. One of them is because we didn't have hardly any growth during the summer months. There's some seasonality to our business, and then also we were still doing the B2C play, so very difficult to raise money when you're not growing. The last 3 or 4 months we've grown exponentially, so that's really helped us with raising money. But then the other piece too is that I would just say that, like, having never done this before, I really had to learn a lot about how to tell like the $1 billion opportunity for Motivo. I mean, you have to be able to sell that level of a story to venture capitalists, and so I had to like really learn how big could this market get, and what lateral market opportunities are there that make it even more attractive. So, for example, speech and language pathologists and occupational therapists and dietitians all go through a similar supervision process. So it's a pain point for many different allied healthcare professionals. And so when you can paint that larger story, it really gets investors more excited. And it gets me excited too, because it's like, oh, wow, this is not just, supervision for behavioral health professionals. This is the last mile of a person's credential throughout all of healthcare that we could be utilized for something like that. So it's been exciting, but I also feel like one of my advisors told me that, when you read the press release and it comes out and you're like, oh wow, they raised such and such money, that it like looks really tied together at the end, but the process to get there is often not very enjoyable, and it's quite cumbersome. And I will say that raising this round of funding is the hardest thing professionally I've ever done. And what I hope, especially with raising this extra amount, that it might give us the opportunity to not have to raise again, because, similar to your point, there's a lot of opportunity in healthcare to raise foundation money or SBIR money or other things like that, non-dilutive funding, because of the impact, because there's we're not just another MarTech company, there's a clear impact on society that we could access other dollars for our next round if we want to.
Going that grant route might be easier than pitching VCs for months, I think. I don't know. Did you end up doing a grant as well, or anything federal funding related?
No, we didn't. One of the things that we've discovered in it is that you have to have good traction so I almost feel like that for us, whether it seems like you would do grant first for a little bit and then raise venture capital, I think for us it might be the opposite, that we might raise venture capital and then prove out the model with so much traction that we're able to attract non-dilutive funding or bank financing. I don't know. Or we might raise a Series A as well. We don't know, but we'll see.
And yeah, for us, our business has so many different risks because it's kind of complex, because you're selling to the big health systems, but you've got to deal with the rural hospitals, you've got to get patient buy-in. It's a complex sale in a complex system. So for us, we've been looking at how do we de-risk it as much as possible, and until we show we can sell to large health systems repeatedly, that's a risk. So we've been, like you were talking about, being very lean and minimizing burn, and I don't want to give up any part of my company. I don't have to until it can really make a huge impact. And rent and salaries and stuff like that doesn't make a huge impact. When I take somebody else's money, I want that to multiply immediately, because that's kind of what the investor wants. So nobody wants to fund your burn, they want to fund your growth. And so we did like a small friends and family round, because there was this incredibly poorly written state tax credit that went away last year, but we were able to structure a note in such a way that we were able to arbitrage some stuff and give sort of a guaranteed return for our investor. But that doesn't exist anymore. It was hard. It was the worst written tax credit I've ever seen. They didn't understand capital structures. But yeah, so we're just trying to minimize our burn while we de-risk the company, because nobody wants to invest in risk. Everybody wants to invest in a sure thing. So when we go out and are going to approach funding, it's what are your questions? What do you think the risks are? And we've taken away all the available risks, because it's a complex system. It's a complex sale to a venture capitalist. So yeah.
So that's a good point, T, as you think through, right? Everybody would love the perfect opportunity that everything's perfectly aligned and growing and up and to the right, but obviously that's not reality, right? And there's always risks in the business. There were risks 12 months ago, today, 12 months from now. As sort of the leader of your business, how do you think about managing those risks and A, identifying them, and B, testing those risks so you can either realize you get around them or push them away? Or how do you think about identifying and managing the key risks in your business?
Well, if you look at our deck, up and to the right is total reality. And if you look at everybody else in here's deck, they're all up and to the right too. But yeah, when you're looking at, understanding your business, understanding, looking at it from a systems thinking way and understanding the outside influences of your business, you've got to know it backwards, forwards, sideways. I can sit there and tell you 19 different types of network effects and how we currently have, the ability for these, but then on our secondary play, when we move vertical, we've got these different, we know that backwards, forward, it's a lot of basic business philosophy, but you've got to understand it because, no offense, but, venture capitalists are, an inch deep and a mile wide, and that's the business. And so understanding, it goes all down to first principles and how to relate that to a VC to allow them your depth of knowledge, because you're going to have more depth of knowledge than your investor will in your tiny little niche, because they need to know it broadly. So you've got to understand how you need to look at the business, and also how your investor is going to look at the business and what risks they're going to look at and what you can de-risk, because you can't fully de-risk, but you want, if you're going to take outside money and you don't want somebody else taking over your business, you better know your business very well.
I would say for us, one of the key risks that we face is, there's this loosening of rules around telesupervision that's happening across the country. So there's a risk that it will tighten up for some reason, or that it won't move fast enough. To give you an example of it, we struggle a lot in Florida, because in Florida for telesupervision, you have to have half of your sessions in person, and the first session has to be in person. So every customer who comes to us, from Tampa, we have to find a clinical supervisor in Tampa so they can have their first session in person, and then half of them after that in person. And it just stagnates our growth there, which is why we focus on the states where 100% of supervision is allowed. But what we've tried to do, as we're focusing on those states that don't have any restrictions, is to move the needle on the states where they're still talking about it, and really position ourselves as the thought leader for telesupervision. So if you Google, online clinical supervision or telesupervision, there's almost nothing there. There's really nothing there, because everybody has been kind of ignoring this space. And I think it's when the benefit of having a licensed therapist at the helm really comes in for us, because healthcare professionals, mental health professionals in particular, are very slow to adopt technology. They think it's going to negatively impact the patient. So being able to share how telesupervision can be used to put more therapists in rural areas who are able to do that in-person work is really compelling to state boards. But they don't want to hear that from just a company who has like a bottom line interest. They want to hear it from an industry insider who's thinking about why this is better for the client, for the patient, for the end user, and it really is. So we have to tell that story.
And if I could just keep in mind, we're in a regulated industry, and understanding like you've done with the regulators and understanding how they're approaching it is key. I mean, it all goes into the whole complexity of the system we're in. But there's a great book by a guy named Bradley Tusk, and he was Chuck Schumer's first comms guy, and then he became the legislative advisor to a small startup out of San Francisco called Uber when they had 3 employees, and he's done very well. But he wrote a book called The Fixer, and it's all about understanding the intersection of technology and politics and understanding regulated industries. And healthcare is a regulated industry, so you've got to understand how you're going to affect. It's not like you can do the Uber playbook, because they'll shut you down and throw you in jail. And she looks good in stripes, but most of us don't. So we've got to, you've got to understand how the regulators are going to approach your company and how they're going to look at your company, and if they're going to see it as something risky that an incumbent can get them to try to stop you. So
let me just wrap up two more questions that will open up to the audience for Q&A. But so as Atlanta healthcare entrepreneurs, what can the ecosystem do better to support you?
Yeah, you're looking at me, so I'll start. I would say that being thoughtful about the kind of advice that you're giving to entrepreneurs, or if you're an entrepreneur, being careful about the kind of advice that you're accepting. A lot of, this is particularly telling for me because in Techstars, you meet 100 mentors in 10 days. And so you get a lot of feedback about your business really quickly. And, coming into this as a first-time entrepreneur, I took a lot of that to heart. And I was like, oh God, they must be smarter than me. They must, obviously I'm smarter, so we already established that. But I thought, I need to take what they are saying and that's probably what's right for my business. And what I've learned over the last year has just been that that not all advice is exactly right for my business. So I've learned how to be a lot more critical and listen to, what feels right for me. I think in particular for us, we're a double-sided marketplace, and the community growth side of Motivo is much bigger than a SaaS or medical device type company. So some of those advice points don't translate. So if I was saying something to the ecosystem here in Atlanta, it would just be, be thoughtful that your advice to people isn't completely subjective and based on your own experience, but that, you're being thoughtful about the questions that you ask and whether or not it's right for that person's business. That certainly would be helpful to me.
So first of all, I just want to say I've been coming to these, like many of you guys now, for the last few months. And this is the coolest thing to see. I think when we first started coming here, there was 20 or 30 people, and now I think today there was 100 or so that RSVP'd, and people have been in and out. And it's amazing to see just this part grow over these last few months. I don't know if you guys remember, maybe 5 years ago, there was something similar where it was Emory doctors and Georgia Tech engineers that would get together for things like that, and that kind of went away. And I would be thinking, oh, you know what, I bet San Francisco has this huge community of health tech folks, and I bet New York has this too. And then looking around today, it's there's no difference between us or New York or any of those other traditionally big health tech cities. We have everything right here, and hats off to AT and all of us for kind of building this. I used to think that when we got big enough, we would move to San Francisco or New York or Boston or any of those other big tech hubs. And now I think there's no better place and no place I'd ever rather be starting a health tech business than here in Atlanta. And I think what we're doing here is a big testament to that, but this is one of many other things that I see that tells me that our health tech presence is growing.
And I think that Atlanta does an admirable job, and the state does a really good job. I mean, the Invest Atlanta had a program called Students to Startups, and not to add more competition, but we did it this year, and it was amazing. And we got a kid who programs in 26 languages. For $12.50 an hour. That's pretty good. But we were the only health technology company there. So Invest Atlanta, look at Invest Atlanta. We've done a lot of work with the Atlanta Chamber. Through that, we're the rural representative on Global Health ATL, which is a JV between the Chamber and the CDC. We've gotten a lot of help from the governor's office. Rural healthcare is sexy for some reason right now, so that's good. But the Department of Economic Development's been really helpful. And through them, we've started the Rural Health Innovation Council, which we've got a throw a plug in for, the Rural Health Innovation Council is all about promoting, rural hospitals as a place for innovation, because if you want to get into a healthcare system, it's hard enough in any system, but at least with rural, you can talk to, there isn't a single decision maker there. The CEO has ability, and you can start seeing your change a whole lot more immediately in a 25-bed critical access hospital than if you go to Emory and you're making an incremental change. So look at rural, please. Happy to introduce you to people. But we've had a ton of support and a ton of help. It's going out and finding it, because it doesn't jump up and grab you. So.
Cool. Well, thanks. One last question. We'll open up to the audience. Any closing thoughts or advice to anybody here who's thinking about starting a healthcare business or wants to get involved in a healthcare startup?
The best time was like 10 years ago, but then the second best time is today. So I'm serious. Like, it's such a long road, right? I think we'd all attest to that. And so it's just getting out there. I think if I would have known how long a road it is, I wouldn't have started. But now that I'm already, 4 years into, since we got that first check, I can't do anything but go forward, And so that's probably the biggest thing is just knowing how long it's going to take. And now I'm prepared for this for my whole career. And so it is something that I wish I started earlier. And so if anyone's sitting on that idea, put it out there, and there's no better place than here and now.
Yeah, I was just reading in a book the other day that talked about, how would you feel if someone else created your idea? And that's a good indicator of whether or not, you should go for it. If it would crush you, if someone else came up with it and you're like, I had that idea, then I think it's a great thing to do. And I think Atlanta's a great city to do it in. I think ATV in particular is a great ecosystem for supporting entrepreneurs, and it's been so helpful to me. So yeah, I would say do it, and yeah.
Well, see, I think ATDC is a great place to support entrepreneurs, but no, they're very complementary, and with both ATV and ATDC, it couldn't be easier to figure out if it's something you want to do. One thing I would say is definitely, it's the whole missionaries versus mercenaries, and if you want to figure out a way to make money really easily, don't do healthcare. It's really, really, really hard. But if you actually want to make a dent in the world and change people's lives, it's worth it every day. And I've had a bunch of different companies, from a safari outfitter to music to a vegan food delivery company, and I dream more about rural healthcare, which is slightly disturbing, than all of those combined. But it's an obsession, and you can actually, being able to positively affect people's lives, if that matters to you, do it.
That's a great one. So let me open up to the audience. Time for a couple questions here.
So maybe this is more specific to my own idea, but if there are any policy changes, how would it affect our decision making into getting into the regulatory space? Because there's a lot going on in the policy making.
There will be policy changes. You don't know what they will be. We've done work. We've done work with. We're very active with the National Rural Health Association. I sat down with the head of Federal Office of Rural Health Policy, and knock on wood, there's a regulation that just happens to help a certain healthcare technology business. But it's understanding how they look at the world, and how do you help them achieve their goals in a way that might happen to benefit your own company is perfectly fair. But it's about trying to make the system better, and as long as you're aligned with making the system better, regulatory change should positively affect you. If it doesn't, let them know why. As long as you're aligned in the right direction, it's a good thing.
Fair enough.
Sorry, one more question. Let me just move on. Sorry, thank you, though. Right here.
So to echo that last question, we talked about customer fit, market fit. Can you expand on regulatory fit? And when you evaluate, okay, a law has changed, and now there's an opportunity, the risk of a law changing and undermining your opportunity. How do you address the existing regulations in evaluating your idea?
For us, it was just, we did a map of the U.S. and looked at where the rules allowing telesupervision were the most loose, and that's where we went, first to establish and kind of build on that. At the same time, also paying attention to where there were conversations happening. Like in Tennessee, you can do supervision online, but you have to get the board's permission for each and every person. And so we're presenting to the licensure board in December. So making those connections are really helpful. But I would say outside of that, I don't know, your question gave me pause to kind of think, like, if telesupervision all of a sudden was not allowed tomorrow in all 50 states, like what would we do? And I think that having other opportunities or other features that you could build on is probably key to that. I mean, we would just pivot to becoming a SaaS company that manages people's supervision documentation. We already have some customers who are paying for that, and that would be a fit for us. And I just thought of that when he said that. I was like, oh, well, I guess that's what we would do. So, but I think it's a good question to ask yourself, like, if this regulation went away tomorrow, would we survive? Is there another opportunity here? And be kind of keeping your eye on that opportunity as well.
And I think one of the big things is know what the big problem is you're solving, not, your problem. You're solving for how do you get better healthcare or better, therapy in areas that aren't getting the proper therapy now. So, you can pivot to what else is a way to do that. I mean, Lord knows we got enough problems in the healthcare system. If you have our true north is what can we do to preserve healthcare in rural America? If they got rid of the swing bed program tomorrow, I've got 20 other things that are really screwed up in rural healthcare where we could pivot immediately. Thankfully, they aren't getting rid of it tomorrow, knock on wood. But no, there's so many opportunities within healthcare that if you drill down and you know what really matters, what are you ultimately trying to achieve, you will find plenty of other problems, I'm sure.
Well, thanks everyone. Just a couple of things just to wrap up real quick. A couple upcoming events here. This will be our last one for this year, but we'll have these again, starting in January. Quick plug, there's a TAG Digital Health Summit coming up next week. There's a discount code for ATV members, so if you're interested, I see Maurice here, Chris is here somewhere as well. Can talk to Chris as well for that. Big thank you, Ashish, Rachel, T. Thank you all for coming and sharing your stories. And thank you all for being a part of this. Again, this is our 6th one this year, every other month, and just looking for feedback as well as we roll into next year. What did you like? What can we improve? And how do we keep supporting the Atlanta ecosystem? So thanks so much. Have a great day.